My name's Edith. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. Right. What my just superlative hostess forgot to tell you was at the airport, this police officer from another county came up to us and she was picked up on outstanding warrant. And so I had to get a taxi cab here, which I'm charging your committee for. So thanks a lot. Kind of the Kim has really been great, and she is very dear. So, uh, you appreciate having somebody who's easygoing because I'm not easygoing. Okay, I'm kind of like Dawn. My way, or you didn't hear me correctly. Was sort of how I see things. It's a privilege to be in Columbus, Ohio, even though I went to Auburn and you may not be the national champions. I have been in the ball with everybody. You maybe, um, the people who put on conferences have big jobs, and I'm mindful of that. So I just want to say thank you to the committee. The two guys that are taping, you could have really done a little more investigation on before you hired them. Uh, Good thing they're friends of mine. They live in Omaha, Nebraska. And, I can tell you that, but for the grace of God, the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and sponsorship both ways. But for those particulars, I wouldn't have been sober since the first day of June 1987. And for that, I'm very grateful. And both of these guys go to a regular meeting with me. And so to have people here who are foundational to your sobriety is real dear. So you've probably got a home group. If you don't, you should get one. I think it's been real instrumental for me. Uh, and with our home group, we'll have inventories because we got a lot of personalities. So we'll have inventories at our home group, and we'll meet on a Saturday afternoon, and some outsider comes in and conducts the inventory for us, and that's been a good thing for us too, because sometimes there's some outside issues that get brought up, or just like Don was talking about, there's something at your meeting that maybe isn't when you were doing your 12-step study, which was just really smoking. By the way, I knew Don was seated here because there was a chamomile filter in my cup that I was drinking out of. Do you remember when you get up in the night and take one swig out of the beer bottle, have a cigarette butt in it? But the back end of that 12-step study or discussion, and it was great. So I'm really privileged to have been here. And so I know Don because one of his sponsees is a good friend of mine, and I've heard his tapes. And I know Paul, and I've met Tim. So you have a lot of great people in your landscape. I am the kind of small cotton, as we say. And Alabama, there's high cotton, and then kind of the low country. I'm the low class bit player in the orchestra here, and thank you for coming. I always have to read jokes, so I have a about one to read. And I am a devotee of the Grapevine. After my sobriety, I've been a subscriber to the Grapevine, so that's now 26 years. And I also been with me. I was in London last month in September, and so I always take the Grapevine if I'm going out of the country, and then I ask if I could buy one of their similar magazines. In South Africa, it was the hair of the dog. This is called a share. So if you want to look at it, I wrote it here. Uh, so from the Grapevine, hard to say. Words that are difficult to say when you're drunk. Innovative, proliferation, Salmon. Words that are difficult to say when you're drunk. Specificity. Anti-constitutionality. You, you know that. Passive aggressive disorder. And for all you Catholics, transubstantiate. Words in down impossible. Sorry, good. Words that are downright impossible to say when you're drunk. No thanks. I'm married. Nothing more for me. You're not really my type. No, thank you. I'm not hungry. I'm not interested in fighting you tonight. I won't make any attempt to dance. I have to be. I have to work tonight. Alabama on the Tennessee River, just a wide, beautiful river. And you're very near some great bodies of water, but the Tennessee was beautiful. And I would go to work after being out on the river all day and all night, and I wouldn't take a bath, and I worked on an assembly line, and we had to wear a hairnet. And that's how I would get up, and I didn't get up. I just went to work. I never went to bed. And the places that I spent time in were like the River Club. And the River Club, I didn't have any flooring, and all the guys there, some of them look like this guy that just came in, played this shadowed. Shirt table hanging out, no doubt. Some guys, you know, with, my kind of Confederates. They were, they'd done time, and they all carried pistols, and you put your pistol out on the table, and they played Hank Williams, not Hank Williams Jr. Every night, and they didn't have a closing time. And when you got out, you just got on your boat and drove home, or you just spent the night there. And that was all right too. I spent the night in my car outside the River Club a few times. But to get out to the River Club meant that you could drive a boat. And I'd been drinking when I was younger. And by the time I was driving the boat, I didn't even have a driver's license. And it didn't matter because Coast Guard didn't come around looking for your boating license. The Coast Guard, however, did know where I kept my boat, my daddy's boat, because they were always at our boathouse. Because our boathouse was the crappiest boathouse in the entire boat harbor. And it was kind of falling down like Saigon into the river. My boats and I run into the doors, and we would have people skiing behind our boat recklessly, and we ran up down the one time I just ran up down the shore. People were just running out of the way. It's my boat coming up. The tomato, blood orange tomato. I had a time out on the river. And it was unmitigated drinking, and nobody was there to supervise you but for the Coast Guard, who couldn't, who didn't really have enough supervisory services to watch over me. But this had kind of started up in Alabama. My daddy was a World War II veteran. He was 12 years my mother's senior. He was a pretty stalwart guy. He drank every day. Until my father died last year, I never saw my father go without drinking every day. Unless he was in a hospital-wise. When we took my father out on hospice, he couldn't drink. He couldn't consume anything because he was unable to swallow. But my daddy had a couple of degrees. He had come from a more affluent upbringing, and he had met my mama, and my mama was very poor growing up, didn't know her daddy. My grandmama sewed, raised all 4 girls without much of an income. And my mama was 12 years younger, didn't graduate from high school. They had a lot of differences in their upbringing, but they were just great parents for as much as they could be to me. And just like Don was talking about, I didn't have any hardship. I might have envisioned that I did, but I had all that I needed. Um, and my mother was an evangelical Christian, and she became one as she kind of lived with my daddy. She sort of first saw her life in a different way than it was unfolding. My dad had a lot of parties and bring people home, and I was a tornado, and, I think, didn't see that things were going to turn out the way they were. But she had a good news club in the back of our house, and she'd have all the neighborhood kids come over, and she'd proselytize to them. And I'd be about down the road smoking with Scott Adcox. That's where I wanted to be. In fifth grade, Scott said, well, let's smoke cigarettes. And then fifth grade, we took a few little higher steps. And then sixth grade and seventh grade. Anyway, Scott was always my good companion. And we'd experiment with everything together. And, Scott's been in prison twice. He's still alive. And he's one of those guys that when he calls me, I know that something is probably pretty grave. But just like was spoken about by Don, you may be the only big book that somebody ever sees. So when he calls me, we end up talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. If we'll listen to him, he's never gotten sober. Doesn't want to be. But so my mother was really trying hard to get me on a new track, And so she would have the Good News Club and say a lot of prayers. And I've been to revivals, and I went up there one time to get saved, and wasn't too long after that I was still drinking and kind of like Elmer Gantry. And if you ever seen that good old movie, Burt Lancaster, and he's a tent revival preacher, and there's a investigative reporter following him around because he knows that Gantry ain't who he's claiming to be, and so he follows Gantry around. And when he finally gets the guy who cleans up all the tents and takes him down for Gantry, he gets him alone and he says, "Tell me about Elmer Gantry and all these women. Tell me about Elmer Gantry and all his drinking." And that guy who's devoted to Gantry says, "Well, he may have a lot of faults," he said, "but I'll tell you what, every time he calls them people up, I come up there and I get saved. And I've done it 27 times. I would understand how to live. Okay, I didn't have any plan for living. I didn't have any design for living. I didn't know what to do, and I did it all poorly because I was an alcoholic. So my mom's praying for me. My daddy, on the other hand, as time's going on, and in our household, we had a liquor cabinet taller than I am, still there up on my daddy's house in Alabama, because there was no legalized liquor sales in Morgan County where I grew up. And you went to the bootlegger, and the bootlegger was fine because they're open 24 hours a day, but you got to pay them a premium. So, if you're buying something that you think is, I drank Jim Beam, okay? But if you're buying even a low class liquor, you got to pay a premium because the bootlegger's taking the risk. The bad news about the bootleg is, as you know, if you've been to stills or drank bootleg whiskey, if it isn't their own, maybe it is, maybe they're buying it in another county and taking the risk. But if they don't know you, they just shoot at your car. So I reached me up with my friend's older sister, Susan, because Susan was older than us, and we could go around to the bootlegger. But I was drinking out of my parents' liquor cabinet when I was younger, and then as I got a little older, I'd go over to the other counties or go to bootlegger, and right up the road in the boat, right up the river, I should say, was Marveline. And you could go to Margoline's in the boat anytime, 24 hours a day, get a case of Schlitz, mind this if you're young, for $6. Buy a case of beer for $6 from the bootlegger. Magdalene was up there by the River Club in Triana, Alabama, not far from my house. Later, Mardelino opened up she closed down because liquor sales became legalized in the 1980s. Then Mardelino opened up a gambling parlor, which was illegal. The last time I went up by the River Club with some of my friends from Alabama, Mardelino now is the mayor of Triana. So she become a now responsible businesswoman, I guess. So not that I've always thought very responsible for, but anyhow. So I saw my father drinking, my mama not drinking very often with him, but my mama, trying to press kind of this idea of her God on me, and very enthusiastic about it, pushing also towards my daddy. My daddy tells a great story that my mama took him to a tent revival, and used to be a guy who wrote a book, and if some of you are familiar with it, it was called The Late Great Planet Earth. And Howard Ball wrote that book, and he had been to Dallas Seminary, and my parents were in San Diego, and they had a huge crowd, thousands of people, and they would go and listen to him. And then everyone in the entire group who would come were to segregate themselves into pairs and then go carrying the road out to the neighborhoods that had been platted on these large maps. And my parents, my mother, enthusiastic, got on this and was ready to travel. My daddy, of course, hung back because he didn't have anything to give anybody, he said, and he really didn't want to be there, but he was trying to preserve his marriage. So my father gets paired up with a man who was about 37 years his senior, and they start moving around the houses. My daddy said he didn't say much, but the man with him was interesting, and they had a few people turn them away, and finally some elderly lady, I'm sure, who just wanted some company, let him in. And my daddy says, I'm a shell jobber from Decatur, Alabama, and my wife's trying to get me to go the right and narrow way, and that's why I'm here. And that's all my daddy said, and handed her a pamphlet. The other man said I used to drive for Bonnie and Clyde, and I killed a man. Well, after that, my father wouldn't move him. He went to every house with this man and had a good time. The part that he says, and you're looking at, for me, coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, and this guy right here, what's your name? Yeah, Tim. Tim starts talking about God. When I first walked in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and Tim brought up God, everything my mother had ever said to me came up. And I got mad at Tim. I got mad at Tim because Tim was talking about God my mother had taught me to understand. Tim didn't know anything about that, but I didn't want to hear about God, okay? I didn't want to hear about getting saved. I didn't want to hear about something stronger than me, really, because I thought I had a lot of strength. But what happens in Alcoholics Anonymous, at least happened for me, was all of that ego, all that idea that I really still had a plan, had to be diminished down to zero, subterranean, all the way down, period. Pressed out, rubbed out. And when that happens, you got the greatest opportunity you've ever had in your lifetime. And of that, I'm sure. Because when that chance happened for me, I was in a hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, with esophageal trouble. And the doctor was standing there, and he read all my medical records, and he said to me, without any frothy emotional appeal, just like the book talks about, he said, "You're an alcoholic." He said, "You're not yet 30?" He said, "But I read all those medical records. I know you've been arrested. I know you've been to a lot of hospitals." He said, "You're an alcoholic. If you keep drinking," he said, "all I can tell you is you're probably going to die. So you make a contract with me right now that you don't want to drink, and we can get you onto some treatment program for this physical trouble you're having. But if you don't want to, that's up to you." And that's how squarely that man talked to me. It isn't often that I see, and I'm working in concert with doctors and psychiatrists, people who have a lot of education in those particular fields, about alcoholism. And this was in 1987. And this guy talked to me as straight as he could in a very clinical fashion. I remember him today, still very clearly in my mind, reporting that to me. And I knew on that day in 1987 that he was telling me the truth. And I believed it. And that was the day that I surrendered. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I was going to have to roll the dice and take a chance to leave what was my greatest love, and that was drinking. Did a lot of dope too. But I knew that I was going to have to get undressed, walk out of what I'd always known, and take a new chance. And I was willing to do it. To get there cost me a lot. You know, when you're giving up everything you've got as a woman for an air conditioner, you know, things are pretty low. Okay. So I was at worry for an air conditioner, you know, because I didn't have one. I lived on the fourth apartment in Section 8 housing, and I didn't have an air conditioner. I needed one. Okay. Well, I did that a lot of times to get high and to get drunk. And so when you're doing that over and over, it almost for me became critical that I continue to drink. Because when you wake up and you don't know what street you're on or who the man is next to you, and you walk outside and you realize you're in another town, you got to start drinking again. It's kind of the great song, you know, Sunday Morning Coming Down, by Chris Christopherson, which, you know, Johnny Cash wasn't supposed to cuss it out on Ed Sullivan. Y'all are too young to know that anyway. And sang it like it was supposed to be sung on Ed Sullivan and got a little criticism for it. But anyway, that's where I was. My life continued to, I could not lower my standards fast enough to keep up with my behavior. Because I'd really been taught well by my parents. They had a lot of fractures in their relationship, but as I said, there was nothing I needed. And my parents did teach me right from wrong. My father, again, he was a guy who got it. And I don't know if that was because he had, you know, coaxed his parents into signing off on him going into the military in 1942 before he was even emancipated. But he got it. When his daughter was drinking to the degree that she was in the newspaper, she was in arraignments in Morgan County in a bikini with a T-shirt on that said, "Disco sucks and marijuana's nature's way of getting high," in front of the judge that sat by my father at the Episcopalian church every week. My father got it. Thanks, Quentin. So Quentin's from Mississippi, so he's making a little light of me because he's, anyway. My daddy got it. My mother didn't. My mother was one of those people who was a soft touch, and you probably had somebody like that in your life. My mother would give me money. She would cry on the ground, pray for me, ask me whatever she could do to help me change. She would do it. Just tell her. My mother didn't understand that alcoholism, you can't rein anybody in. You know, you can't, human power can put us in, can it? Doesn't happen. Isn't going to happen. So that's what my mother was hopeful for. Did not occur. So for her, it was, a real perplexing idea. My daddy, on the other hand, told every pawnbroker, don't negotiate with Edith. Told the bank she stole the checks from my company, don't cash them. Told the guys that worked for him, because he was a shell oil jobber, go get the tow truck, go all over town, find Edith's car, tow it in, put it behind the gates, and don't give her the keys. That's what my old man did. He got it. Because when I started drinking, everything that the book talks about happened to me. I had a allergy, and I also had a mental obsession, and it was the first drink that started it. And then no one knew where things were going to end up. I used to always carry in the watch pockets of my Levi's 2 and on, second off for one reason. I loved them. But the reason was when I'd start drinking, it was a lot better if I took something so that I'd pass out because I never knew where I was going to end up drinking. When I was 17, I had been at a disco joint called the Plush Horse in Huntsville, Alabama. And that's when you wear one piece, zip up, pant, what do you call those? Jumpsuits, okay? Had on a jumpsuit. You know, it was done in summer. I loved it, okay? So I'd been over the Plush Horse with my best buddy, Jane. You probably had a running buddy like Jane. Jane had just been sort of extricated from a full body cast. And I'm not talking about a cast like you see today. Jane was in a plaster Paris cast that went from her feet to her chest. And we would carry her around in a truck. Okay. And Jane had been in a cast because she'd been in a head-on collision. So Jane had just gotten out of this thing, had been through physical therapy, was walking again, and Jane and Edith were out drinking like we always were. You know, she was my best my best like collaborative confederate, okay? So she was with me. We'd been drinking all day. We'd gone and dropped her car somewhere. Some of this isn't all perfectly etched in my memory. We got in my car. I had a Pontiac Bonneville. Got in my car. It's about 3 or 4 in the morning. And we were going back to her house. She lived in a rural area. And a train hit my car. Okay, so I was driving. It was actually the car hit the train is more like it. The train was already crossing the train tracks, and I ran into the train. Train mangled my car up. Car falls over into the ravine. Jane is thrown from the car. A woman comes along, unbelievably, going to her job as a nurse at the hospital for her shift that, starts at 7 in the morning and finds us. My throat was cut. The windshield went through my throat, and my larynx was cut, even though I'll still sing tonight if you ask me to. Jane was thrown out of the car, and this woman got a rescue, made the rescue calls, but she took me, her and another man, took me in her car to the hospital because I lost so much blood. And I was on respiratory therapy, and I was in a coma for a while. I didn't remember anything. But when I woke up a few days later, my father and a guy I had been seeing were by my hospital bed. And the gentleman, Tim, my boyfriend, was sick to his stomach, looking at me. I didn't know why I was there or what had happened. Anyway, I knew that it was serious because of his reaction to me. So I was in the hospital for a long time, and not as long as Dawn, but for a long time. And I was drinking in the hospital. Had people bringing me liquor and beer in the hospital. Never on a single occasion after that accident did I consider that drinking was a problem. Now, I wasn't arrested because of my serious condition. And the railroad didn't want anything to do with me because they were worried that a lawsuit might ensue because I didn't have all the proper safety gear in this rural crossing. But I'm telling you, I walked away from that without any conclusion that there was a nexus between drinking and that accident. And as time passed, that happened to me over and over. I wrecked boats, I wrecked motorcycle, I wrecked cars, and I'm telling you, it became a management situation. And maybe you lived like this. I knew a good lawyer. I knew a guy that could post my bond because my daddy didn't do that anymore. And it was all about management. And there was one day when I was sitting in Morgan County Jail, and I thought to myself, my life's always going to be this way. And I'm going to be just along for the ride, however it happens. But I better have all these securities in place because these things are going to happen to me and it's not going to stop. And if I'm going to get out and, as my arrests accelerate, I've got to be sure that I've got all these things in order. So it really became a management issue. I had been kicked out of my home and I was living at Jane's and we were working on a dairy farm. And because I'm not very physically industrious, I didn't want to work on the dairy farm very long. It was the hardest work I'd ever done. And if you're smoking 2 joints and drinking 6 Miller Ponies at 5:30 to get ready for work, you're just not the best person to be, moving cows, cleaning dairy equipment, and baling hay. So I went back to my father and I begged him for a reprieve. And I'd done well in high school when I went. And he said, all right. And I went to the University of Auburn. And at that time, I didn't have a driver's license. And up in Alabama, or down in Alabama, when you don't have a driver's license, they'll take your tags. So I would hitchhike to school, and the only cat that would pick me up was the garbage man, the city garbage man. Because I was emaciated and I looked like I was homeless, and I nearly was. But he would pick me up and I'd go into school. I started drinking every day when I was in college. And, I did all those things that I'm not proud to speak of. But I did live with a guy for a while, and he now is an engineer with a company that contracts with NASA. And I know that he could hardly tolerate me as a roommate and a partner, because I was never anything you'd want in a partner. Okay, I didn't know what fidelity meant. He and I would fight down at an old bar we went to called Harry's, and if things didn't go as I exactly expected, I'd just get in the car with some other guy and come home 2 or 3 days later. We'd walk up to the house. Tim would walk out. He'd knock that guy's nose, hit the man in the nose, knock his teeth out. I mean, these poor cats who kind of befriended me temporarily didn't understand what they were in for. But Tim and I were always down there, and we were always drinking. And the great thing about Harry's was that I could go to Harry's in my bathrobe. And I don't know if any of a place like that where you could drink, but Harry's was that low class. I only had to walk from 1313A up like a highway about 50 feet, cross the highway, go to Harry's. The reason I know the name, the exact address of my old house is because they served a lot of search warrants on it. It's still right there in my database. But at Harry's, I didn't have time to get dressed sometimes. I had a lot of pressing matters that I was attending to at my house, and I'd lay down there in my bathrobe and sit at the bar in the morning. And at Harry's, in the urinal, the women's urinal, it said, don't throw toothpicks into the urinal because crabs can pole vault. Okay. See, that's where I spent a lot of my college career. The reason I want to tell you a little bit more about this is because things really got heavy down there. I was doing a lot of things that were illegal, and a lot of people knew about it, because if you're living like me, you're trying to live privately, but you're living out loud everywhere you go. Everybody knows what's going on down there in my old, down there at my father used to call it the rat's nest, down in the rat's nest where Edith lived. So the police had come and they tried to arrest me a few times, and they were unsuccessful for a number of different technicalities, and I had a good lawyer. But this last time they came, and it was my birthday. You know how your birthday starts about a week in advance, and I'd been having a big birthday party, and I'd been taking lysergic acid for about a week. Okay. And so when they came over, it was hard to see them. They came in, they put every guy on the ground because a lot of the guys I ran with were felons and they had shotguns to their heads. And I thought a good time for me to leave was now. So I started climbing out the back window, locked my bedroom door, climbed out the back window, and I could hear the officer, narcotics officer, been in my home. This guy had been to my home. He begged me to get into a hospital, begged me to live a different life, cared about me because he was dating a girl from my hometown. He'd extradited Scott, my old buddy, extradited him to Florida, got him put in prison again. He'd come over appealing to me about, please do something. You've got a great problem, serious problem, Edith, with drinking and alcohol. I'd tell him to get out of my house. I used a lot of explicatives. He came back with a no-knock warrant and about 20 police officers. So this was more serious than anything that had ever happened because when they searched my house, they found a lot. And as things go, I'm standing in front of a judge, which I'd done a few times before, but this was, again, more serious. And I got 5 years at Juliet Tutwiler Prison in Tuskegee, Alabama. And my father calls me up and he says, I brought a man with us. He went to Korea with this judge. He said, and that's the last card I'm playing out of my hand for you. I love you. I don't know what's going to happen to you. But if he suspends his sentence, you're to never come back to our house. You're to never come back to any home of your grandmother, your auntie, and don't have anything to do with your brothers. I've given you everything I could, and I wish you well, my daughter. And he got on a plane and left. The judge suspended my sentence. They took me to supervised living quarters where I lived for a year, and I didn't quit drinking. As soon as I got out of that particular situation, which was in Iowa, I started drinking again, and everything happened just like it always had. I was laid up with some man I didn't know. I was getting arrested. Almost killed a couple of people in another car accident. And I was in jail again in Nebraska. And as soon as I got out, they put me on house arrest. And that's when I had all this trouble with my esophagus. And I was up at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And that's when that doctor said to me, "You are alcoholic." And that day, that moment in time, I knew that guy was telling me the truth. And I knew absolutely, without a doubt, that something had to change. And there was a flicker of hope. I had a big lighter still down here. I wanted to live. I'm not sure why. I've certainly been with alcoholics who don't want to live anymore, and I understand that. And I had a sentence that required me to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I had a bracelet on my ankle, and I would go up to this club because I didn't have a car, and I'd walk up there. And this woman calls me out, and she says, "Hey, Ethel, you come in late and you leave early. Why don't you introduce yourself?" And I said, "Well, my name's not Ethel, and I don't want to be here." And that woman became my first sponsor. Her name was Pamela, and she was committed to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she helped save my life. Now, like Don was talking about, divine intervention is what saved my life, but I'll tell you what, he taught through Pamela, because I wasn't interested in your God. I can tell you that. I had to come to my own conception of God. But she worked the steps with me when I was getting ready to do that fifth step, and I had all that trepidation about all these kind of compromising situations I'd been in and crazy things I'd done to people and big serious mistakes I'd made. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go meet with her. She was up there at the University of Nebraska where she was a student. She's now a doctor. Went to medical school in her 40s. She said, "You come on up here. Get on up here. Press me, press me, press me." I showed up. I got undressed, theoretically, did that work. Very fearful. But I knew one thing about her. She was just like me. And I knew with absolute confidence that I trusted her. Because the way she had lived was exactly the way I'd lived. She had been an intravenous drug addict. She had been she was a primary alcoholic. She had had a parent who was an alcoholic. And she had lived just like me. And I identified with her on a level that I never identified with anybody else. And for that reason, if you're going out of here tonight to see a sponsee or to 12-step somebody or to talk to somebody who wants to quit drinking, you got something to offer them that nobody else does. My mother is dead from drinking. My cousin is dead from drinking. And I tell this story because I think it's important. Both of them had every church-going member praying for their exorcism, I guess you would say, from alcoholism. And they're both dead. I watched them both die of alcoholism. There was never an opportunity on my mother's part, from her perspective, that anything like Alcoholics Anonymous would work for her. For me, it's the only thing that's released the handcuffs. When we're talking about freedom from bondage, I thought y'all were talking about some kind of sadomasochism idea. Okay, what is this freedom from bondage? I lived in a halfway house for a while, and one of the gals that was the counselor always wore this T-shirt, "Freedom from Bondage," and I didn't understand what it meant. And she started talking to me. Her name was Roxanne. She'd been a prostitute, lived a tough life, man. People held guns to her head often. And she started talking to me about what freedom from bondage meant. And I cannot tell you, when I wasn't in jail, I was the architect of my own prison. And to be out of that prison today, to be free through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and nothing that can measure up to that in my lifetime, nothing that I know of that's given me the freedom that you've given me. To walk around without shame, to know that I'm as worthy of a seat in the room at my home group as the guy sitting by me, because I've cleaned the toilets there and swept the floors, but I've earned a seat in that room. That I can now practice the profession, just like Don was talking about, to which I probably didn't deserve to have a license. I'll tell you a little bit about that. After I got sober, I did work the steps, and I continue to work them. And it's a great benefit to have women that I sponsor come to me, because I can tell you I'm often doing 10th-step work with them. Sometimes I don't even expect it. I think it's healthy for me to tell a gal who's got 3 years of sobriety what I'm doing as a counterexample, because it models the behavior for her of the 10th step, and maybe she'll go practice it too. But I was kind of encouraged by my sponsor's husband to go take this exam for law school. And I said, "Do you understand what my history looks like? Really?" And he said, "Well, go take the test, or if you don't start there, nothing's going to happen." So I did. I went and took the test. And when I was seated by a guy, and he said, I've been practicing, doing practice tests for 5 months. He said, "What did you do to get ready?" And I said, "I read the manual last night at the bar where I work." I was working in a bar and sober. When I got sober, I was working in a bar. This may not be recommended. I also moved in with a guy within 3 months that I met at a meeting. Okay? The reason I'm also reporting that to you is I've done many things that weren't recommended. Okay? And it may not have been the exact proper way to handle my navigational course, but I was always transparent, trying to be, with my sponsor. And your sponsor may have a different view about relationships or whether you work in a bar. But I'm telling you, alcoholism had driven me to such a place that I was desperate to stay sober. And the steps chased my heels till I got them done. I was desperate. And that's what happened to me that day at that hospital. I was desperate, and it intersected with the opportunity. And again, that for me has been the greatest day of my lifetime, that God gave me that chance. Because I've been given so many chances. My father used to say every time I'd get on the airplane leaving for go back up to Omaha, "Hey, baby, don't forget, you got a lot of mercy and no justice." And boy, is he right. Boy, is he right. So anyway, I applied to law school. And you know what? I live in a town where there's a law school run by Jesuits. Do you know what the Jesuits are? Anyway, they're a community of Catholic priests, and they're all about second chances. And they gave me a ride. They gave me a ride, even with this long, bad career. And then when I get out of school, when you dropped about 80 G's on that and lived in the ghetto, they said, you can't take the professional exam because of your history. And I, of course, said to God, as you understood him, let me report to you what I think about this proposition now that I've done this pick and shovel work. I finally got through this, and now here's where I'm standing. And my sponsor said, well, why don't you go to some of your professors and see if there's an appeal policy? And I did. I went to 3 of my professors, and they all agreed to go with me to appeal this decision. And I read a letter of an appeal letter, and that was accepted. And what I put in that letter is exactly what I put to the letter I wrote to the Board of Pardons and Paroles. Because when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was a felon. And back then, your restoration of all of your rights had to happen only with a pardon. That's not always the case now, but I required a state pardon. So I went to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and I went to the bar examiners, and I told them all the same story, that I am sponsored in Alcoholics Anonymous, that I sponsor women, that I had worked the steps, that I had been a treasurer of a group, that I had volunteered and been to the penitentiary in Lincoln, and that I had been a GSR, General Service Representative, at one of my groups called the Wednesday Night Fellowship Group, and that if they would give me a chance, that I would hope to be a representative of this profession that would be respected and that would look out for the integrity and the professionalism of the job. And the Board of Pardons and Paroles, many of the people who'd read about me in the newspaper all those years when I was growing up, wrote letters on my behalf, and the Board of Pardons and Paroles pardoned me in 1991, and I was also allowed to take the bar exam and sit for the bar exam, which I was fortunate to pass, and I was fortunate enough to carry a law degree, which I still have today. Why am I telling you those things? Law school may not be in your future, but what might be in your future is what you don't know yet. Because Alcoholics Anonymous gives you the opportunity, if you're willing to take the risk, to go for it. I tell the gals I sponsor, go fail at a few things, okay? I jump out of planes, and I navigate for a guy who drives race cars, okay, back in Omaha, who these 2 cats know, because I like speed and I like danger. I'm a scuba diver, but those are things I really adore, okay? But the reason I'm telling you that is you got to be willing to take the risk. I sponsored a gal. She got out of prison. I'm never going to be a nurse again. We go, she goes before the nursing board. They don't give her a license back. She works as a waitress for 2 years. We go back. They say, all right, we're going to give you a provisional license, but your sponsor has to sign a quarterly report. We want you to drop UAs, take a retina ID, and they give a lot of strict procedural requirements. And I can go on about people I sponsor, but this woman in particular, we go through that for 2.5 years. She gets her nursing license back. She's still on paper now. She's been started out in a nursing job in the night shift at a treatment center. So she's bringing in and then evaluating the wet drunks. And then she goes to a doctor's office. Now she's fought over. And that's what happens in Alcoholics Anonymous. It isn't that everything's going to be restored to you, but if you want to take the risk, God will give you the opportunity. And you may fail. And if you can't fail, you can't play, baby. And I have failed at so many things. I am often the counterexample for the gals I sponsor. I went through a time in 2012 where I hated a guy. I hated a guy that I had to litigate against very often. The woman that I represent has some notoriety. And so the man that we are against, I grew to hate. And because his absolute job, as I saw it, for the last 10 years has been to put her into a very degrading position and me as well. And he has written the Supreme Court about me, filed ethical violations, none of which have ever been successful. But he always is giving me so much hell that it became very distressing to me to the point where I hated him. And I have a system in my office that includes some people that work for me, one of whom can go find out a lot about you. Okay. And I was going to, start my systems working for the degradation of this guy because I had decided that's what he deserved. I thought about him every day. I had started becoming aggressive towards him rather than acting professional in the courtroom. I had started not sleeping. And the reason I'm telling you this story is I had to get broken to the level of forgiveness. I had to pray for that guy every day. I had to talk to my sponsor about him every day. I didn't pray for him every day. I prayed for him twice a day. I went to the Sweat Lodge where I learned to pray with the Lakotas. And I started talking to Wendell, who's a Lakota and a friend of mine. And I would burn sage. I would get on my knees and pray for his betterment. If I forgot to pray for him, I would pull over in traffic and stop in a parking lot and pray for this guy day and night. Because I'm telling you, that resentment took me down. It took me down. And I was really looking at doing things that were chipping away at my sobriety to bring him down. The other thing that I wanted to tell you about that's happened to me recently in my sobriety is my father died. And my father was the guy who said, don't ever come back and see us. Don't ever call upon anybody to get money or property from us. And when I got sober, I started making amends to my father, and so I'd return to Alabama every 4th of July and every Christmas. And as I got more resources, I went more often. And my father, as he was dying, we didn't know he was dying. He started losing his ability to process things through his kidneys, so he went on dialysis. And I just started leaving my business in January and February and March in 2012 so I could be at the hospital with my father in Alabama. And because my father was really instrumental in saving my life. Because if not for him, I wouldn't have been on my own and out there trying to I wouldn't have been forced to be self-supporting, and I wouldn't have been forced to really wake up to my alcoholism and in such an accelerated way as I did. But when I was done, there was nothing more dear to me than to be sitting in silence with my daddy night after night. But the other thing that was going on is both my brothers who both are evangelical. No offense to anybody's religious practice. I'm proud to know them. But my brothers were really riding me. And they said, you're going to hell and Daddy's going to hell. And we were having some arguments about whether he was going to be fed by a tube, how long we were going to extend his life, and some of those decisions I had to make. And my brothers didn't agree with them, and they'd come over drinking and get on me. And I called my sponsor one night, and I said, I think I'm going to be in a fist fight out here behind Daddy's house with my brothers tonight, and I'm 26 years sober. And that's about where I got to. The last few days my daddy was alive, I kept praying for my brothers and my father. I wouldn't turn on the TV or turn on the radio or anything. I'd just sleep by my daddy's bed and had all the narcotics. My brothers told the hospice women, isn't this unbelievable? He just got all the narcotics and she's a drug addict and an alcoholic. I had them because I was there, because they taught me how to, administer them. And of course, some of them already knew how to administer, but nonetheless. What happened to me during those days is my father's couldn't talk, but I knew he was with me. And since hearing's the last sense to go, sometimes I'd sing or be silent and just sit with him and hum. But as time was passing, all I knew was one thing. You're my eyes now. You're my ears now. You're my voice now. Forgive your brothers. Take care of them, and do not act like you want to act, which is a hillbilly. You've got to be about forgiveness. And I knew that with everything in me for one reason, because nobody'd forgiven me more than my daddy. And if we're going to be about forgiveness, and asking for it, then we better be about the office of giving it. And I can tell you today that my brothers and I all stood and held hands at my father's funeral. And I miss him a great deal. And I think about it every day. And I know that he's standing behind me, even when I got to go litigate with this guy who used to hate. but but that idea of forgiveness has really been important to me this year, and how I'm looking at the people who are around me, who day to day are by me being asked for me to sometimes for their forgiveness. So my father gave me a lot of great gifts, but that in particular has been one I won't forget. So, and I remember that often. I just wanted to say one other thing about being silent and meditation, because I did learn it from Lakotas, and I didn't understand how to be silent before. But when you're in such a prayerful place as a sweat lodge, now I go to a church with my husband. But when you're in a prayerful place and you've never had that opportunity to be silent, it was a great experience for me, and I had some great teachers. So I'm going to close and read just something my favorite reading out of Came to Believe. God's grace had overcome the death that was in me and instead made me a member of the Society of the Second Chance. If this grace had been contingent on my righteousness, my obedience, and my goodness, and my sacrifice as acts of my own will, it would never have come to me, because I had not one of those things going on. I've been afforded an unearned favor, and I was an unlikely prospect. The grace that overcomes death by forgiveness is the truth that has set me free. Thanks for your time.